Thanks for joining us on this long weekend. Hope you're enjoying it. Ukraine's President Zelensky met with G7 leaders today in Hiroshima, Japan, on the sidelines of the summit, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as we just saw, and President Biden. Biden used this meeting to reaffirm the U.S.'s commitment to bolster Ukraine's defense against Russia. This after announcing a significant policy shift on Friday. The U.S. will let allies supply F-16 fighter jets. That hasn't happened yet, but Zelensky said today that he is confident it will in the coming months, especially now that the U.S. has endorsed this plan to start training Ukrainian pilots on F-16 fighter jets as part of a joint international effort. For more on these latest developments, let's bring in Admiral Mike Mullen. He is, of course, a former chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff. Admiral Mullen, thank you for making the time this morning.
Good morning.
Obviously, lots has happened over the weekend, particularly at the G7. The U.S. is now saying it will allow Western allies to supply Ukraine with advanced fighter jets and support an effort to train Ukrainian pilots on those F-16s. How significant is that, do you think?
Well, I think it's really significant. This is something, obviously, Ukraine, President Zelensky in particular, have been asking for almost since the beginning of the war. And I think it'll have a big impact. Clearly, they need this kind of capability. Their aircraft they've attrited some of them, the older MiG-29s. They've lost some of their air defense capability. So I think the F-16s, when they get there, will have a big impact.
Why the reversal, do you think, from President Biden and the administration on this issue?
Well, I mean, I don't know for sure, but it seems as though, I mean, the United States has been very supportive of Ukraine across the board. In fact, one of the things that was announced at the G7 was another, I think it's $375 million in weapons support specifically. That said, there's been a caution about it tied to where this could go long term, particularly with respect to Putin, not sure what he would do, whether he would use nuclear weapons or not. And earlier in the campaign, the air defenses, were not as critical as I think they will be now. So I think that combination has just that has been the view of the United States leadership, that in time, from my perspective, this would happen, and in fact now it has. I think there's also been pressure from inside Europe that we need to support that. There are plenty of F-16s there in places like the Netherlands and Poland. So there was, to some degree, I think, an inevitability of this. It's just now the decision's been made.
I know President Zelensky gave some assurances to President Biden that the planes would not make their way into Russian airspace because obviously the fear of escalation is a real one. So what do you think the F-16s will be used for? How will they be helpful to Ukraine in this war?
Well, I think they'll be, fiercely used to protect Ukraine, fiercely used to, in fact, cover ground forces as they move. Now, I don't think they're going to get there in time to support the spring offensive, if you will, which I think is going to come here, in the next 30 days or so. But certainly, possibly by the fall, the F-16s will be available, and anything on the ground they can cover. Clearly, they can protect against any kind of air forces that the Russians would use to attack in, big cities like Kyiv, et cetera. So they'll be used comprehensively across the battle space in ways that will really make a difference, and in fact reinforce the Air Force of Ukraine, which has lost some 30 or 40% of their own aircraft. So it really is a big deal.
Right. One of the other points of conversation, I guess, this morning, too, is what is really happening on the ground in Bakhmut. President Zelensky said Ukrainian troops are there. Russian mercenaries have said they have full control of the city. Obviously, I'm not expecting you to know for sure what's happening there, but I wonder what you think about the fact that that battle has gone on for so long and that both sides are staying there and are staying in it, regardless of who has control.
Well, I think, first of all, if reports are accurate, I mean, there's not much left of Bakhmut. Yeah. Secondly, I think it's been a strategic place as opposed to a tactical place, meaning there's strategic significance there in the sense that the Ukrainians have fought to a fairly well. And if you believe President Zelensky, they still do control some aspect of it. So I think the strategic significance is very important. And I think the Russians have sacrificed and lost a ton of people, of forces, of military capability. So in that respect, it's been a draw of their forces, even though many people speak to it as if it, tactically, it really doesn't make that much difference. So in that regard, I think it's been important, and it's really shown and re-emphasized the commitment of the Ukrainian leadership and the Ukrainian people.
You mentioned the spring offensive, which you say hasn't started yet. What would you expect that to look like, and how will we know that there has been success from a Ukrainian perspective?
Well, it's hard to know. The Ukrainians have been brilliant on the battlefield, and so I think any predictions at this point might be misguided in terms of what they actually might do, because they've been so good and in many ways surprising. I certainly expect it to occur. It's most likely going to go west and south. I read a report this morning that they could be looking at trying to take back Mariupol, which would be a big deal. I don't think there's any question that it's coming. I don't have great expectations that the Russians are going to be able to fight a whole lot better than they have in the past, although I think it will be very, very difficult. And the Russians have consolidated their forces. They're using many more long-range weapons, if you will, and I think that will continue. But I think the Ukrainians will move and they'll take back a lot of their territory. How far they'll go, I think, is an open question. How far they'll physically be able to go. I think the operative question is, can they get back and take Crimea? I just don't know the answer to that.
The G7 was obviously another moment for major players in the world to say to Ukraine again, to President Zelensky's face, we're with you, we'll stand behind you, we'll give you whatever it takes. Do you think that resolve is being tested, will be tested, or is this really just going to be a consistent support from Western nations or G7 nations to make sure that Ukraine wins?
I think one of the most significant moments in this war was actually when Prime Minister Kishida visited Kyiv a few weeks ago. I mean, it was an extraordinary moment, and indication of resolve by certainly Japan and its leadership, but also representative. I think the G7 has certainly reinforced that. This can't go on forever, though. So certainly the resolve is there, I think, over the course of the next many months and maybe through this winter. And then we'll have to see, probably based on how things go on the ground, where that goes in the future. At some point, as is always the case, these wars have to end. And I would hope we could get to a negotiating table as quickly as possible. The human losses have been unbelievable. The resources that have been have flowed to this fight have also been unbelievable. And the message to Putin needs to be: you're not going to win this, and you can't do it again. And that has to be part of the end state as well.
Okay, Admiral Mullen, so good of you to make the time this morning. Appreciate it, sir.
Thanks, Rosemary.